Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I begin, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important that I inform you that I'm splitting my time with the fantastic MP from Quebec. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to rise in the House today to speak to my motion, to speak to the NDP-sponsored motion calling on the Minister of Finance to announce action in Budget 2014 to protect consumers by limiting ATM fees. Mr. Speaker, from my great riding of Sudbury to St. John's, from Val-d'Or to Victoria, every Canadian has at some point stood in front of the ATM in stunned silence, stare at the screen showing just how much they've been gouged from taking out cash from their very own bank account. Canadians, Mr. Speaker, are angry, and rightfully so, as their families are being nickeled and dimed by banks reaping in record-breaking profits while they struggle to put food on the table and pay for the other necessities of life. Mr. Speaker, according to the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, withdrawal fees can cost consumers as much as $5.90 per transaction at a bank-operated ATM. If you contrast the costs being forced down the throats of Canadian consumers with those being charged to consumers in other developed countries, it makes the cost of using an ATM in Canada even more unsettling, Mr. Speaker. For instance, in many European Union countries, withdrawal fees from ATM fees are free. In the UK, 97% of transactions are free of cost. In fact, a report from the British Bankers Association comparing its banking system to that of 10 other developed nations found that Canada had the highest fees for ATM withdrawals from their own bank, Mr. Speaker. This begs the question, why do people in the UK and Europe get a break from their banks while ordinary Canadians continue to get gouged? Although estimates range, analysts agree that Canadians pay somewhere in the range of $400 million a year for the privilege of using ATMs, representing nearly 5% of the revenue of the biggest banks in Canada. Thus, Mr. Speaker, it's not surprising that Canadian banks are reaping record profits, $29.4 billion in 2013, up 5% from last year despite the weak economy, because they are doing it on the backs of hard-working Canadian families, Mr. Speaker. And how did we enter this cycle of ever-increasing fees? Well, surcharging on ATM withdrawals has become standard operating procedure for Canada's banks since 1996, when the ban on surcharging was lifted following a ruling by Canada's Competition Bureau. In 2000, many banks began adding a new convenience fee in addition to their Interact fee for their consumers who use an ATM owned by a different institution or operator. This has led to ATM use becoming more and more expensive, Mr. Speaker. The most shocking part of ATM fees is that, on average, the real cost of processing a transaction today is estimated to be around 36 cents. So where does the rest of the money go? Well, we know that 0.7 of 1 cent goes to offsetting the cost of operating Canada's world-leading not-for-profit Interact network. While there is obviously a cost to operating and maintaining these terminals themselves, the rest is going to pad the profits of the big banks, the big card networks, and independent machine owners, Mr. Speaker. Currently, there is no limit on what the operator of an ATM can charge a consumer for using their machine. This is unfair, and it is a policy we as parliamentarians must address head on, Mr. Speaker. These fees are rip-offs, plain and simple, and the government has the power to act immediately to drive down the cost of ATM fees. Some of my colleagues on the other side of the House may think that $2, for example, is not a burdensome cost for Canadians. But here is the unfair thing about it, Mr. Speaker. The average person going to an ATM machine takes out $20 or $50 to get them through a day or two, and they are charged $2.50 for accessing that money. Yet someone else may withdraw $500 and they pay the same $250. This means that the financial burden of ATM fees falls disproportionately on low-income Canadians, and that is grossly unfair, Mr. Speaker. And that is why groups like the Public Interest Advocacy Centre, Option Consommateurs, and ACORN, amongst others, support the NDP's call to cap ATM fees. At one point, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance seemed receptive to the idea of limiting these outrageous ATM fees. In 2007, in response to the NDP campaign to ban ATM fees, the minister told the House of Commons Finance Committee that we agreed with the NDP that the banks ought to do something in terms of consumers with respect to ATM fees, to try harder. However, Mr. Speaker, in the end, after talking to the banks, the minister climbed down and no action was taken to protect consumers from these outrageous fees. Now, because of the minister's lack of action, ATM fees continue to rise for lower-income Canadians like seniors, students, persons with disabilities whom the minister expressed particular concern about. So, Mr. Speaker, while the Conservatives talk a big game about the importance of protecting consumers from the most abusive practices of Canada's largest corporations, their failure to crack down on ATM fees, and the plethora of other consumer abuses undermines this claim. Here, Mr. Speaker, is an opportunity to prove they are serious and actually do something tangible for consumers. A failure to do so will make this government's priorities clear. Bay Street over Main Street, Mr. Speaker. The minister's friends at the banks will argue that capping ATM fees will significantly decrease the number of ATMs that banks offer to Canadians. However, Mr. Speaker, according to the World Bank, Canada has the highest number of ATMs per capita in the world, with 204 ATMs for every 100,000 people. The OECD average is 74 ATMs per 100,000 people. But, Mr. Speaker, when you think about the costs that Canadians have to endure every time they use an ATM, no wonder the banks have so many of these ATMs out there. Moreover, the banks claim that the ATM fees must be high enough to cover all checking account-related costs, and that's undermined by the fact that banks also charge many other high consumer fees under the premise of covering those exact same costs. Mr. Speaker, Canada's banks charge consumers scores of other fees for maintaining and accessing funds in their checking accounts, monthly fees, overdraft fees, failed payment fees, failure to maintain a minimum balance fee, e-transfer fee, and many more, Mr. Speaker. Given that banks are already recouping their costs through these other fees, the NDP's call for a 50-cent per transaction cap for ATM fees seems entirely reasonable. With a 36-cent per transaction cost to the bank, this would still give them the ability to recoup their operating costs while maintaining a healthy profit margin. Mr. Speaker, would also restore a sense of fairness and balance to what is truly an asymmetrical relationship between consumers and their bank. So, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives claim to be on the side of consumers. But time and time again, this Conservative government, like the Liberals before them, has sided with the big banks, refusing to crack down on excessive bank fees. New Democrats have put forward a practical solution, Mr. Speaker, which will restore a certain amount of fairness to the relationship between consumers and their families and the banks. By supporting this motion and including a provision to limit ATM fees in the upcoming budget, the government, Mr. Speaker, has an opportunity to help hardworking Canadian families who are already overburdened by household debt and are struggling to maintain their way of life. Mr. Speaker, as I can conclude, a failure to do so will demonstrate that hardworking Canadians can't trust the Conservative government to do what's best for them and their families. We need experienced leadership that puts Canadians, not bank profits, first, Mr. Speaker. Canadians deserve better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Minister of State for Western Diversification.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. This side of the House, we're all for consumer protection, too. We've put forward a lot of work over the last year in terms of making sure that consumers are put forth first. And I just have a couple of, I hope, just very generic and nonpartisan questions around this particular motion. I'm just wondering if my colleague is, when he's talking about the $2 fees, if he's looking at customers withdrawing cash from their home branch, or just from those that are withdrawing from other branches as well as generically owned ATMs. If they know what the cost per year aggregate would be to Canadians, and do you know what the revenue created by those independent ATMs, owned ATMs would be as a percentage of compared to the larger banks? Do you know what I'm saying? Like in terms of small business ownership, like what would the impact be if it was capped? And I'm just wondering if you've consulted with these stakeholders in terms of what the impact would be on their business ownership.
The Minister of State was asking me the question, but I believe it's her colleague, the Honourable Member from Sudbury, that she'd like to answer the question. The Honourable Member for Sudbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm more than happy to answer those as best I can. The first thing I do need to make clear, Mr. Speaker, is what we're talking about here today are the ATMs that are operated by our federally regulated financial institutions, so the chartered banks. So for the ATMs that you see that are privately owned in a pub or in a corner store, that's provincial jurisdiction. What we're talking about specifically here are the financial institutions. Now, when it comes to, I have an account at Set Bank here in Canada, as most Canadians do, or a credit union. I pay a monthly fee. I'm going to make this number up. I pay $14.95, and I have 20 transactions that will not get charged. Once I go over that limit, even though I'm using the same bank, the one that I'm a member of, I get what is called a regular maintenance fee. They eliminate what they call a foreign fee. Their foreign fee, Mr. Speaker, is what is actually a convenience fee, which is using someone else's ATM. And so then I have to pay $1 for that, plus then pay the other bank $2. It is starting to skyrocket out of control because it is unregulated. And we need to actually put a hamper on this, and that's what this bill and this motion is talking about today.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to solicit some clarification also on it. The member made reference to the fact that I believe he said a 50-cent cap in terms of being able to charge the consumer. And my question is related again to those independent machine operators, the store that goes out and purchases a machine and wants to attach its own fee, whatever fee that rate that might be. My understanding, based on what the member has said, is that that would not apply. So any independent machine that's out there that is not administered through one of our banks, national banks, would in fact be excluded from his comments. Is that a fair comment?
Once again, request all honourable members to direct their comments to the chair rather than their colleagues. Honourable Member Sudbury.
I'll address my answer through you, Mr. Speaker, and hopefully we can set an example moving forward as we go there. The question relates to the specific ATMs that are owned by, John Smith or Mary Smith, who has a convenience store. That is provincial regulation. But what I'm hoping what we can do here today to answer through you, Mr. Speaker, my honourable member's question is lead by example. We have an opportunity here, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that our banks don't continue to gouge Canadians. And what we're seeing is when we've got record profits of $29.4 billion going into the banks, we're doing this on the back of hardworking Canadian families. And the one thing we're saying, Mr. Speaker, very clear right now is, you know what? We understand that the banks need to make a profit. The banks need to recoup their costs. The banks need to make money to service this network. That is being addressed by folks in the U.S. Senator Durbin in the U.S. did a great report, 36 cents a transaction. Talk to stakeholders here in Canada. If we're similar, we should be able to have it capped at 50 cents per transaction, still allow the banks to do what they need to do, and keep more money in the pockets of Canadian consumers so they can invest in their families and invest in their communities, Mr. Speaker.
Please.